You've landed inside Launch Street, the Business Innovation Podcast, where we interview top innovators out there shaking things up so you can innovate, differentiate, and get further faster. Since you're here, we know you're the type of person that recognizes the importance of unlocking your innovation advantage so you can compete and win. And now, your host, the person that has worked with leading companies like Disney, Procter & Gamble, Aero Electronics, the U.S. Army Research Labs, and Red Robin on upping their innovation advantage. Tamara Gontor.
Hey Launch Street, Tamara here, your host, bringing you all the innovation from all the everyday innovators. Now, speaking of all the everyday innovators, did you know that being innovative is universal? We all do it. However, how we do it is unique to each of us. What does that mean? Well, our research has discovered that there are 9 styles of innovation, or ways that we as humans innovate. And of those 9, you have 2 power styles that come together to give you a massive competitive advantage. It's how you perform at your peak, drive breakthrough outcomes, and have a stronger, more valued voice as you ignite innovation all around you. So do yourself a favor. Go at least take the IQE assessment, at least the free level on our site. It's our gift to you. You'll get a piece of the puzzle and discover one of your top 2 power triggers that hold your magic. It's a fantastic start. So just go to the website, go to launchstreet.com, link is in the show notes, and click on Take Assessment. The innovation advantage can be the difference between now what and what if. So speaking of everyday innovators and emphasizing the importance of investing in yourself and the people you lead, today's guest, Paul Sarvadi, is a master at this. Paul disrupted the human resources industry and built an organization, Insperity, that has been at the forefront of its field for decades, guided by his mission to help other businesses improve their outcomes. He is also author of the book, Take Care of Your People, The Enlightened CEO's Guide to Business Success. He's got a lot of real-world experience wrapped up in this book. So what I really appreciate about Paul and how he built his company and the work that he does is that it's all about putting people first, not process, not systems, people. Seems obvious, but if you look around, I think so many approach this backwards. So let's go talk to Paul about people. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to an in-depth discussion.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Tamara.
So what's the one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
Oh, let's see. I guess they might be surprised to know that I grew up in a 7th of 9 children, so a large family. And probably the key driver from early on was that I started caddying at a young age, and that kind of prompted both the love for golf, but also the love for being successful financially. On the very first day I caddied, I took my money, went straight over to this grocery store in town, and I bought a jar of pickles because that was something that was, you only got one when you're in a family of 9 kids.
Right, that's a whole jar.
So and I said, man, I really like this idea of earning money and doing whatever you want with it.
I have this whole theory, by the way, and it goes to your caddying, about part of the reason we see so many successful people from places like Brooklyn, the Bronx, like outlying areas, is because you see the success, the wealth in these cities that they're next to, New York City, Manhattan, right? Like just wherever you are. And you really you get this drive for I want to be a part of that. And it kind of goes to what you're saying about being a caddy and seeing this is what it looks like when you are financially a little bit more free. And that's what I want. I kind of took us off on a tangent there, but I have a whole hypothesis around that.
Yeah, I also think you end up serving others in that capacity, which is really important for young people to do. But you also see all different types of people, and you start to really understand people a lot better when you do serve others.
Do you think, too, in taking that kind of servant role and understanding and being of value to someone else, right? Because you learn that along the way. What can I do to make this person's day better, their golf game better, serve them better while we're together? Did you also find that in interacting with all these different types of people, you started to see maybe the commonalities between them too in terms of what made them successful?
Yeah, absolutely. You see the commonalities of those that do well, how a positive attitude plays in, and those kind of things. And you also notice the behaviors and attitudes that, seem to detract. So it's educational, and if you think about it, you can put it to work in your own life.
So I mentioned in my intro that you built a very successful business and then took that experience and success and wrote a book recently titled Take Care of Your People, The Enlightened CEO's Guide to Business Success. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the show. I'm curious, what moment in your career made you realize that the people factor was so important?
Well, sure. Just when I started Insperity back in 1986, just prior to that, I'd actually, I've been a serial entrepreneur. I love starting companies and building businesses, but some did well, and I had a couple in a row that failed miserably, and I was feeling pretty rough at that point. But it really struck me how difficult it was for small businesses to succeed. I wanted to really improve the success equation, both the likelihood of success and the degree of success. But what really struck me was the commonality of what could lift companies is it's really all about the people. And I thought back through, what I could have done better, and if I had known more, if I had some other help, how it could have made a difference. And it kind of really made me focused on, if you get the people part of the business right, sky's the limit.
So this might be a very simple way to ask this question, but you realize this, you wake up the next day and you go to your work. What did you do differently once you made this realization?
Now, this is kind of interesting. When my original partner and I sat down to kind of talk about starting another company, we were not really in great shape to do that. And in fact, we were both scared to go home and even say we were thinking about starting another company. But it was between Christmas and New Year's, and I said to him, I know we agreed we're not starting another business, but there's nothing else to do. So, I guess there's no harm in saying if we were going to start another company, how would we do it? And of course, that's entrepreneurial seizure error number one. Now you're down the path. But what we ended up doing was is a unique way to start a company, because instead of starting with a spreadsheet or how much would we sell or how much, what the product and offering would be, et cetera, we actually started with what kind of company would we want this to be? What kind of, how would we want people to feel about being in our company? And so we start out with some value, what I now would describe as value statements or value questions that really turned into describing and creating a unique culture for the company. But we asked, for example, where I said, I want to hire people for their input, not their output. So really seeing people as a valuable contributor from the day they come in. Or, having people work to live instead of living to work. Why are we paying people for coming in as early as possible and staying as late as possible when we could do a lot better if we paid them to innovate and create ways to get the job done sooner?
I love those. I'm just taking notes as you talk, because I think it's really interesting to think from the starting point of what kind of company do you want this to be versus, well, what do we want to sell? Where's the gap in the marketplace? Because you can get to that with the right people for sure. And I think what you're saying about what does the company want to be is something that you can apply to a team level too. If you're inside an organization, you can ask, well, what do I want this team to be about? It's kind of like, what's our working agreement? What are our values? And if you run a company, what do you want the company to be about? Did you find that when you made this distinction and kind of had this realization of, hey, these are the things we really want out of value, that it made finding the right people and putting them in the right spots easier or more difficult?
Yeah, no question about it. What I didn't realize then is we were describing our corporate culture. I don't even think I knew what that term really meant. But it turned into a whole set of values that we felt like were important, not just to become successful, but how we get there was important to us. And that does help you to attract people with a common value base, and people, are people. And if you find those common values, you'll find people who you can collaborate with, that will put out discretionary effort because they're on the same team.
So Insperity grew to what? It was supporting more than 100,000 businesses, had over 2 million employees, 77 offices throughout the US, right? 3.8 billion in revenue. Hopefully I got that right, my numbers. How did you, as you grew, how did you make sure that that culture, those values that became so important, became what you wanted to build, but also the kind of North Star for the company? How did you make sure that that was infused across your company as you grew? Because I think oftentimes I find that that's the hardest part. It's easy when there's 3 of you, 50 of you. It's harder as you get bigger.
Yeah, there's no question that both the size of a company and how dispersed you are, makes a difference in how you go about ensuring that your values are adhered to and that your culture is extended across the company. But it's certainly can and is done, but it takes a lot of effort and thought about how to go about it. The key is really to make sure that the culture that you have is actually by design and not by default, that you have the end in mind and you're able to measure how your culture is performing, and then making sure that in all the elements of how you interact with people, whether it's in the hiring process or the employee communication process or in the performance review or training process, that these cultural elements and values are rewarded, emphasized, and clearly woven through all the different ways you interact with your people.
I want to ask you a question about that, about the rewarding, because one of the things I often talk about in seeing cultures is companies that reward behaviors, not outcomes, tend to keep their culture alive. Meaning, if their culture, if their value is constructive conflict or honest debate, whatever it is, and they reward people for doing that, they get to the outcomes they want. Not that you shouldn't celebrate a big win or whatnot, but is that kind of what you mean about rewarding culture and actually taking it back to the behavior level versus the outcome level of I got a new client, I improved a process?
Sure. I mean, of course, financial results is how you measure an important measure of the success of a company. But it's really the people that are driving those financial results. In fact, if you look at the 5 areas of business, sales, operations, finance, technology, and people, all those strategic plans for each of those areas, it's the people that implement those. So
right.
For some reason, it's been hard for people to realize how much people are the driver of the success. And it's how those people behave and what's rewarded and how you demonstrate appreciation for those things that really drives those results. So,
yeah.
I really see that link is so direct, but a lot of times people, don't connect to that really well or don't see how it's the behaviors that drive the results.
That fascinates me, I have to say, Paul, because I agree with you. I think it's a direct line, but we get so focused on rewarding behaviors and rewarding successes and actually punishing failures versus focusing on the behaviors and the culture that we want more of. And in your book, you talk about the 10 strategies for success. So I want to take a second to dig deeper on a few of them in the time that we have on the podcast that I thought were really interesting. And they were all really good, but these 2 really stood out to me. One is getting your culture right. What do you mean by right, and how do you know if you've achieved it? And I think that kind of builds on the conversation we were just having.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, you need to really understand that the way I view corporate culture is that it's not a part of the engine. I mean, if I can use that analogy, an engine of a vehicle, it's not really a part of the engine, but it's the oil that makes the engine work. The whole thing doesn't work if there's no oil in it. And so your question about how do you know that it's right? Well, it's right by how things work. If the oil is bad, if the oil's sludge in there, everything's breaking down and you're just not getting where you want to go as fast as you want to get there, or you're not getting there at all. Maybe you're not even moving. So, I can tell that the culture is right by the speed of execution. And there's really, in my view, there's kind of 3 elements to that. It starts with an environment that unleashes discretionary effort at the individual level. An individual feels free, safe, and safe to fail, free to achieve, and not having to look over the shoulder every minute about every decision, and that leads to discretionary effort above and beyond. And then the second element is a unique level of collaboration that happens when that culture's right. So you have all these people together on teams putting out discretionary effort, and wow, the exponential factor in a team environment with the right culture is incredible. And then at the end of the day, which I kind of feel is the CEO's ultimate job, is alignment within the company with whatever the right objectives are for the business. Because once you've got this mobilized, collaborating team with everybody putting out discretionary effort, you better point them at the right objectives.
Right. That it's amazing how much time you can spend throwing stuff at the wall when you've got a bunch of people who are super motivated, excited, but not quite the right clarity on where to move
Absolutely.
forward.
You end up with management sometimes it's perceived anyway as an idea of the week or idea
Yes.
of the month, as opposed to a real, strategic plan that is being executed.
Let me ask you a question on this, because as you were talking about getting your culture right and kind of knowing when it's not right or needs work, and you had said earlier, which I thought was brilliant, about having it by design, not default. I'm just going to want to bring this to a real world example. So I had a client who, was a big consumer goods company, and this one brand team their product was not doing well in the marketplace. So everybody rallied their efforts around repositioning the product, looking at new ingredients, new benefit lines, new places in the store, like what's wrong with the product, right? New consumer targets. And when I met with them for the first time, I remember thinking to myself, this is a while ago now, but thinking to myself, oh, what they have is an internal problem. Like they're actually focused in the wrong place. Do you think, when you've got those type of external indicators, that actually if you worked your way backwards and kind of got the team right, the right solution would come out of it? Were they misguided?
No question. In my view, in fact, I spent a little time in Take Care of Your People talking about the connection between the culture and the brand. And the brand really can't ever extend beyond what the culture can deliver. And so it's really critical to have, your brand promises have to be a reflection of what you can deliver as a company. And what you deliver, how you deliver it, and, how effective you are is really culture driven.
So the second one I wanted to ask you about is employee communication. That's one of the strategies. We often talk about leadership communication, but not a lot about employee communication. Talk more about that.
Sure. I've always felt like it was really important for employees to have the information they need in order to be really effective at what they're doing. And a lot of times there's just a big gap between what leadership is, what's on the mind of leadership, and what's on the mind of employees. So
right.
To me, it's very important to have good feedback mechanisms, good ways to compare what thoughts are around the company as far as what's on people's minds. For years and years, I've done a company meeting on a periodic basis and willing to answer any question anybody puts on the table, and it can turn into some pretty funny questions sometimes. But a lot of times you get to realize, some of the things that are on people's minds, gosh, I didn't really think about, and it gave a great opportunity for me to kind of give some background, because people perform best when not just when they know what we're trying to do, but why are we trying to do that? What is the benefit? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? A fully informed person, usually has a higher level of emotional stability about things, and that frees people up to put out that discretionary effort. So I'm a big believer in good, clear, two-way communication with employees.
What I think is fascinating about that, Paul, is oftentimes, I think as leaders, we tend to hold information back And I don't know that it's malicious. I think it's just human nature. Like, oh, they don't need those facts, right? Or I can't share that because then they'll know the numbers really look like this, or whatever our reasoning is,
Right.
So you've seen this before. You know what I'm talking about. And then we get frustrated when our team doesn't buy into our vision or our path, and then we say, well, they don't have all the information. Well, it's because we didn't give it to them. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I think transparency and communication is actually key. Not to say that everything has to, there's things that are confidential. I get that. But generally speaking, right, isn't it better to tell people more than less?
I generally believe that. Now, we struggle with that to a degree because, I took our company public in 1997, so been CEO of a New York Stock Exchange company for 20 years. So, going all the way from startup to the New York Stock Exchange. And, I've had that same philosophy all along, but as a public company, you really are limited as to, disclosure of certain types of information. But, when it comes to the strategy level and the long-term objectives or even the near-term objectives or, key initiatives, and certainly constantly reminding people about the values and how what's important at the end of the day, what's important to our customers. Our mission is helping businesses succeed so communities prosper. So always reinforcing how that connection is so important between what our clients' success and the actual success of the communities those people live in. So, there's a lot you can discuss and talk about without getting into things that maybe are confidential for some other reason.
How do you think focusing on your people helps them become stronger contributors and stronger innovators? And I think, and in particular, deal with the change that the accelerated rate of change, really, that we're all facing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because in that question, there are actually two of our value statements that directly relate to that. We always talk about innovation as a fundamental driver to our long-term success. And, I read a book a long time ago, Built to Last, and, it's about all these great companies that were tremendous in their industry and then eventually didn't make it. And what's the difference between those companies versus companies that, survived through all the changes?
Yeah.
Right. One of our value statement is embracing change as an opportunity to learn and improve, because a lot of times there's a lot of fear around change. But if you kind of build a dynamic where you say, look, let's embrace change. It's going to happen anyway, and let's look for it and look for trends and then it becomes kind of staying on top of things and being out front, and that leads to innovation. That leads to a mindset of constantly trying to improve and, realizing that connection that you have to change, you have to innovate for long-term success.
Well, and I think, Paul, what's also important about what you're saying is, number one is about embracing change, that we can fear it and deny it. We can hold on for dear life, but we know what happens to those people and those companies. They basically go down in flames. I think when we recognize that change can be our greatest friend, we can start to see the innovation and the opportunity, which you did in your business and as you grew it. And if we look at a lot of the great companies out there, what they really did was look at the change that was happening around them and then leverage it. That's it. And not that that's it, because it's not always easy to do, but it's a different view on change that leads to a different outcome.
Yeah, no question. I think if disruptive answers to problems, come out of that, being ready, prepared, and embracing change as an opportunity.
I'm curious. A lot of us say who run companies, whether that's a public company or a Fortune 500 or a smaller company, we all say we're people focused. That's what you're supposed to say. We know that, right? So we say, oh, we're people focused. We celebrate birthdays. We recognize people. We say thank you. How do I know if my company is or actually isn't? I guess I want to flip it. How do I know if I'm really not people focused? What are the tangible signs I need to start paying attention to?
Yeah, I think if you think about those three primary elements I talked about, individual discretionary effort, collaboration in teams, high-level collaboration in teams, and, alignment of an organization. Those three things lead to speed of execution. So to me, I can check without answering a lot of people type questions whether it's really people focused, because you would have the opposite. It would be difficult to execute your plan. You would be running into real speed issues around the company. There are obstacles, things that should happen easier, faster, but it seems like it's bogged down. Sometimes that's because people can't work together well in teams because they're worried about political issues within the company or other elements that people kind of in their own departments or where they aren't working well across organization lines. Or it can be right at the very individual effort where people are kind of doing the bare minimum to get the job done. And those are all signs that you really don't have a people-focused culture.
What I appreciate, Paul, about what you're saying is that there's ineffective collaboration, but also that people do the bare minimum. And it's one of those things where I interviewed a guy who's a conductor, and he takes these companies through being part of the orchestra, and he pairs them up you'd be with a violinist, I'd be with the trombonist, whatever it is. But first he has them, I was probably not even right, I'm not an orchestra person, you can tell, but he has them play at 70%, and the music is good. It's fine. But then he has them play at 100%, and you can feel the difference in the music. And I think to your point about doing the bare minimum, I think sometimes it's easy to stay there because we don't always recognize it right away because we're getting enough done to get by, and not the 100% that you're talking about.
Yeah, in fact, I've done this before in groups, but I think one of the most effective times I ever did this was one of my daughters. I have five daughters and a son. But one of my girls had tried out for soccer, and she was a good player, but she did not make that team, which was really hurtful for her, really shocked her. And I said, "Well, Diana," I said, "how hard did you try?" And she said, "I tried hard." And I said, "Well, raise your hands above your head." And she did. And I said, "Higher." She put them a little higher. I said, "No, higher." She put them a little higher. I said, "Raise your hands as high as you can." And she put them as high as she could. And I said, "Did you try that hard? Or did you try the way you tried when I told you to raise your hands?" And you know what? That is she still reminds me about that story because,
That's great.
It kind of punched her card with, giving our best initially, which is not the normal thing to do. It really isn't the normal thing to do. You have to kind of pull it out of yourself.
Do you think that with your teams that actually, let me ask this differently. When you've got this large company, you've got all these different teams of people and individuals, and maybe you've got one team that's not quite living up to those values, or maybe the leader's not quite being people focused. What do you do in those scenarios when maybe you've got a hot spot that needs some work?
First of all, it's kind of evaluating what the root causes are, for us not being effective. And I always, use people excuses as a last resort because, I've always say business problems have HR solutions, have people solutions. But for people to be effective, processes have to be right. People have to be organized around the right objectives and have to have, clear direction about what's going on. So I always check those other things first before you just go and say, hey, we have either a leadership problem or we have, bad apples in there or whatever. So, that's kind of the first step. But once you kind of say, hey, look, we really do have kind of misalignment. We're not getting where we want to go. That's time for a heart-to-heart, and there's different ways to go about it. Usually start with the leader first, and that's great coaching opportunity, great opportunity to, reset the direction, say where do we want to go, and, why aren't we getting there, and how can we get better?
So I can't even believe we're almost out of time, so I want to ask you a few more questions. I just want to make sure not to miss. First, before we do that, where can people go to learn more and connect with you and get your book so we don't miss that?
Sure. Yeah, they can go to paulsarvadi.com. That's SARVADI. paulsarvadi.com.
So, the title of your book, you had said kind of enlightened was one of the words you used. I'm wondering, when you talk to other CEOs of companies and you talk about the people focus, what kind of response do you get from them?
Well, it's really interesting because it's not like it's a rocket science idea to take care of your people. I mean,
yeah,
it comes off of people's top of mind pretty straightforward. Hey, I want to take care of my people. But actually, the truth is, if it were rocket science, it would be easier, because rocket science works the same way every day. It's math, science, physics, and that's what makes rocket science work. But this is behavioral science. And, because you and I are involved, because it's people, it works differently every day based on, how we feel that day. There's that much of a dynamic there that has to be understood and has to be, accounted for in how you do what you do. So I kind of help. That's why this word enlightenment is an important one, because you really need to shine the light on what it takes to, have people aligned in your organization. And you have to be every bit as systematic and strategic about it as you do with your technology strategy or your financial plan. And if you do that, your chances of success go way up.
So I want to ask you a question about the word alignment. I'm really, just given your experience and the size of your company, looking forward to hearing your answer. I think alignment and consensus are often misplaced or confused for each other. I'm just curious, from your perspective, what alignment is versus what consensus is, and which you really want and why.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, there's a huge difference there, and they're not synonymous, primarily because alignment has action attached to it. Consensus is more passive, and alignment would be more active. Alignment means we are in force, moving the right direction together, heading toward the same target. Consensus just means, hey, we're agreeing to that it's nice to hang out here and be in agreement.
Do you, right? Hey, it's nice to hang out here. I like that. I'm just going to hang out over here in the consensus pool. It's the kiddie pool. And I think with consensus, the struggle that I've seen with it is, first of all, it's impossible, right? Especially when you're dealing with larger groups. And second, it really waters things down. To get things to a place where everybody agrees means you got to pull out some of the more daring, maybe more bold elements of it. My question about alignment for you is, and I'm 100% with you that's, we recognize this is where we're headed, this is what we're doing. I think there's an element to that too, of when you leave that meeting, so to speak, whether that's a physical meeting or just knowing that's what it is, of really getting behind it versus talking about it badly when you leave. You know what I mean? Sure.
Well, if consensus is your goal, you have to have agreement for that. You don't have to have agreement for alignment.
Right.
If you've got your culture right, you already have kind of embedded a way we arrive at decisions about what we're going to do. And, you've got an environment that says, once we're all on board, with the decision, that's what we're doing. Hey, you can have alignment without agreement. And
right.
If you had to wait around all the time to have agreement on everything, you talk about no speed of execution, that would be it.
Well, and that goes back to two things. One, that goes back to what you were saying earlier about when a company's not team focused, is I think they're always trying to get to agreement, because that's a false sense. I think that's a false sense of people focus. And to your point earlier about people understanding the why, I think when it comes to alignment, people don't need to be right. They need to be heard and valued. And if they understand the why and they feel that way, if you go in a direction that maybe wouldn't have been what they chose or wasn't the direction they wanted, they get it and they're okay with it if those two things are in place. Don't you think?
Absolutely. That's why that employee communication is important, about what you're doing, why you're doing it, having that open dialogue going both ways. You can't take every suggestion from employees, but you need to let people know that just because you didn't take it, that doesn't mean it wasn't a good idea. It just wasn't something we were able to do based on other reasons and, found a better solution, or maybe that wasn't even a better solution, but it was the only one you could afford at the time. So there's just a lot of other factors that go in, but I agree that, people want to be respected and valued, and you can't reach either one of those if they aren't even heard, listened to, and appreciated.
What do you think? I think I know the answer to this, but I want to kind of hear you talk about it. Sometimes what I see is companies focus, they want to be people focused, but what they ultimately do is focus on certain levels of the organization. They say, well, the greatest impact is at the director level, leadership level. So that's where we'll really put our people focus. And then they'll just infuse it across the organization, their teams. Is that the right way to do it? Or are you really saying, hey, you got to figure out strategies for all levels?
I think there has to be an underlying company-wide value system and, a way you decide you're going to interact with people, and what your objectives are, for the long term, about how everyone is treated, and ultimately, it's across the company. That doesn't mean that you can't, maybe there is a place you need to start where where you need to focus on for some other reason. So it's not necessarily one or the other, but certainly, you can't just say, hey, we're going to be really great to this group of people because everyone else isn't as important. That will never work.
So I can't believe we're close out of time because I could keep asking you questions, but what's your final piece of advice for innovators out there and leaders out there seeking to up their people game?
Well, I think one of the quickest things leaders can do to really up their game and interacting with people is really learning how to show appreciation at the individual level, especially doing that in front of others, where you can let people know when they are demonstrating the values and the behaviors, and when they get results. Being able to really show appreciation about the person and their creativity they showed, or their talent that they demonstrated. It's amazing. It doesn't cost anything to learn to be and to use that tool of showing appreciation.
Paul, thank you so much for joining me today. I took so many notes of things that in my company, it's funny, we're just about to go through a whole kind of our strategy session of what are we about, what have we accomplished, what are we looking to accomplish? And it really made me realize that I need to back up and spend a lot more time on really making sure that I'm clear about our values and our driving forces, and then getting to our products and services and strategies versus kind of the other way around. So thank you for that reminder. And I hope that all of us leaders on Launch Street take a second to think about that as well.
Well, thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for hanging with us on Inside Launch Street. If you know someone that is truly ready to unlock their innovation advantage, have them join you on Launch Street. Discover your innovation advantage, build a team of high-performing innovators, and ignite ideas and solutions that create massive impact. GOTO, launchstreet.com. Remember, innovators, if you don't take the leap, somebody else will.